Hi, this is Jamey with Stonemeyer Games, and I'm here today to talk about my favorite game mechanism in A Castle for All Seasons. This is an older game, almost 10 years old now, that I've had on my list to play for a while, and fortunately Geekway to the West had a copy in their library, so I got to try it out there a few weeks ago. And I think the reason I was really drawn to it is it kind of seemed like a classic Euro game that was beautifully made. Like there are some classic Euro games that the graphic design and the art isn't all that great, but this game has the Michael Manzel art that you see in like Stone Age and a couple other games, Legends of Andor. It's beautiful art, this beautiful board. And the mechanism that I really loved about the game, my favorite mechanism, is actually tied to that art, which is when you start out at the beginning of the game, you put this board down in front of all the players, and it depicts kind of a side, somewhere between bird's eye view and side view of this medieval town, and many of the, or pretty much all of the buildings on the town have they aren't built yet. You can kind of tell that they're not complete. Like they're gray. Like the color isn't quite there. And what that represents is that there are tiles in the game that are the shape and size of those buildings. And during the game, when you gather resources and have enough resources to build those buildings, you put them down on the board on top of the outline that represents that building. And so you see this town to come to life as you play the game. It's a great matchup of the theme and the mechanisms, because it's not even though it is abstracted, you're putting cardboard on a board. It is the least level of abstraction that you can possibly have, because you're actually putting the building on the board. But my favorite mechanism is tied to this. So in the game, that's one of the major ways that you get victory points. That you're building these buildings, you're putting them on the board. But as you do so, each of the buildings has action spaces that you or any player can put workers on. You pay money to put workers on these action spaces. And they're not, I'm saying action spaces, they look like action spaces. They look like places in a worker placement game where you put workers. But the key with this game, and this is just really clever, so after you build, you have the option of putting some workers on the board. And there's some other actions that you can do that end up putting workers on the board. But it's a one-time thing. You're not putting workers on to do some immediate action and then pulling those workers back off later. The workers you put on the board are tied to end game scoring. So there might be a building that you put out on the board that you build, or that someone has built. It doesn't have to be you. Let me think of an example, because it's been a few weeks. But like one might be a tavern, and for every worker on the tavern, that worker will score points equal to all the other workers on the board. Or maybe there's another building where the worker that you have down there scores points at the end of the game for all buildings that have been built, or all action spaces that aren't occupied by workers. There are all these like little victory point conditions that are on the board. And a lot of games have these little end game victory conditions, right, that you're selecting somehow. But I really like how it's all tied together into one tight package on the board. Both the buildings you're building are there, and your endgame scoring is represented by these workers that are slowly populating this town. So the effect at the end, it's some interesting choices during the game. Do you focus on building? Do you focus on putting workers? Do you try to pair the two so that when you build, you also have enough money to place workers on the board, therefore optimizing your engine a little bit? And B, at the end of the game, you have this beautiful board with all these completed structures that you built and workers that are populating the town that are then tied directly to endgame scoring. And you just pull the workers off the board as you do the endgame scoring. I just thought it was a really clever mix of art and theme and mechanisms. Michael Manzel isn't the designer of this game, but he seems to bring that whenever he's the artist of a game. So I really appreciate that about the art that he makes. So yeah, that's my favorite aspect of Castle of All Seasons. A Castle for All Seasons. So if you played it, I'd love to hear your thoughts, what your favorite mechanism is in the comments, or if there are other games where you think that the claiming of endgame scoring is interesting, or where when you build stuff you really feel like you're building something that is then used from then on in the game. I guess Lords of Waterdeep would be one of the more classic examples where you're actually building structures and players can place workers there to take actions from then on. And then Charterstone, which is hidden behind me on the table. You can't see it, but I did a prototype, a playtest yesterday, and that's all that Charterstone is. You're building structures, and then you're placing workers on those structures, their action spaces, from then on in the game, and for all games after that, because the buildings in Charterstone are permanent. Yeah, so anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about those mechanisms and a castle for all seasons. Thanks.